Well, the federal government will soon release plans to regulate driverless automobiles. Companies such as Uber, Google, and Tesla have already been testing various kinds of automated technologies. Some of their vehicles have even, in fact, hit the roads in several cities across the United States. And in an opinion piece published in this morning's Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, President Obama wrote about the new guidelines, saying, and I quote, "Automated vehicles have the potential to save tens of thousands of lives each year, but we have to get it right. Americans deserve to know they'll be safe today, even as we develop and deploy the technologies of tomorrow," end quote. Here's Transportation Secretary Anthony Foxx on the new guidelines.
Look, what's happening right now is potentially a 100-year wave of innovation into the automobile that we haven't seen since the automobile was actually created. And what we have a responsibility to do as an agency is to help the safety advocates, the manufacturers, and the states that also regulate the operation of automobiles to understand how to build safety and safety culture into this emerging area from the beginning. And I think what's so revolutionary about what we're doing with the policy is that it's not forcing a choice between safety and innovation. It's actually showing how both things can happen at the same time.
In a perfect world, I suppose. Transportation correspondent Kris Van Cleave joins us from Washington with more now on the details and these guidelines again that Secretary Foxx was discussing. The government's proposing them. What exactly are we talking about here, Kris?
Well, so this is, think of it as the foundation from which regulations will be built upon. And at the center of this new policy is a 15-point safety assessment that the government is going to ask developers of self-driving vehicles to adhere to and to have answers to these questions. And there are things like, where's the vehicle going to be used? How is it going to operate when it's in self-driving mode? What happens if there's an accident? How are you protecting privacy? What are the cybersecurity protections? In the event of an accident, how does it respond? If you're shifting out of self-driving mode because of an accident, how do you go back into self-driving mode? How are you recording the data? What is the crashworthiness of the vehicle? They want the industry to sort of be able to answer every one of these questions. What's interesting here, Josh, is that it's not required. This is not a rule. This is not a regulation. This is a policy in that they didn't go through the rulemaking process, in part because that would take years, and this was an effort to get some sort of framework out there into the public domain while the cars were being developed. You know, they've been promising this sometime this summer. Under meteorological summer rules, they made it by a couple of days. But the auto industry, the developers of self-driving vehicles, had been asking for this kind of guidance and really, working around not having it as we've seen this technology really just explode in growth.
And obviously the application of the technology is something altogether different. All the guidelines in the world, frankly, can be engineered, and yet it is quite a vacuum in which they would be applied, considering that you will not have an environment where all cars are driverless. Obviously, they're allowing for that as well.
Right, and really what the federal government is doing is sort of calling the ball on this. They're saying if the car is driving itself, this is going to fall into our jurisdiction. And that's a little bit of a departure, because typically driving and licensing and car stuff ends up being governed by the state. You know, the state issues the driver's licenses, you register your car in a state, and the federal government's argument for why they want purview over self-driving vehicles is they want one policy that stretches coast to coast, so you don't have a system where the rules in Washington, D.C. are different than Virginia, which are different in Maryland, which are different in New Jersey, and are different in New York, because we know that once these self-driving cars are really out there in the marketplace, they're going to be crossing state lines. And the thought here was it was better to have one cohesive policy as opposed to rules that could change state by state, and that could impact what you're able to do with your driverless car.
Again, we heard Secretary Foxx say essentially we're talking about perhaps once-in-a-century innovation, and I can respect that. There are sources very close to me, Kris, who swear that you will have to pry cold, dead hands off of the steering wheels to live in a world of driverless automobiles. So if nothing else, what sort of time frame are we looking at with regard to this technology being the dominant technology on the road?
Well, I think the first step you're going to see is you're going to see more of the testing like what's going on in Pittsburgh right now, where Uber is pilot projecting self-driving Ubers. You're going to start to see more of that, and it will be gradual, but I think you're looking 2 to 3 years, you'll start seeing self-driving cars on the roads in a much more visible capacity. You know, and then it becomes, when is the technology affordable? Maybe that's in a 5 to 10 year window. When does it become the dominant one? I think that's a big open question. One thing that is clear is that there's a real strong belief that as these self-driving cars take to the roads, regulators think that's going to make roads safer, because the vast majority, something around 94% of accidents are due to human error or human choice. If you engineer that out, you're going to make the roads safer. And because the cars are going to be computer controlled, in theory they can operate closer together at a higher speed, so maybe traffic moves more efficiently. You can make a strong argument for automating the driving. The hard thing is convincing people who love to drive to give up the steering wheel, and that could take time.
Yeah, arguing against math and science, though, never the right side of history, I suppose, to be on. Kris Van Cleave, as always, we appreciate it.
No problem.